Welcome to Let's Talk Micro. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Micro. As always, I hope you had a great week. Remember, you can always find Let's Talk Micro on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Pandora, Goodpods. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Let's Talk Micro. As for our social media, I am on Instagram as Let's Talk Micro, no apostrophe, on Twitter as Let's Talk Micro 1, on LinkedIn as Luis Plaza, on TikTok as Let's Talk Micro, and a YouTube channel that is called Let's Talk Micro. And if you have any feedback, any podcast topic suggestions, you can always email those at letstalkmicro@outlook.com. So please go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, download episodes, leave a review if the app allows you to do so. Definitely any suggestions, any feedback, they are welcome and appreciated. And on social media, I always like to post pictures of organisms and give updates as to when the next episode is coming out. If you haven't listened to the previous episode, please go ahead and do so. It was a great episode, great conversation with Mathilde Scott, Nicholas, and Katie. So Mathilde is a microbiologist from the University of Sorbonne in Paris. And she wanted to she came up with a way to teach microbiology to students. Like she talks about medical students. It can be used for a refresher for lab technicians. So she came up with this game, and then Nicholas designed the game, and Katie did the drawings. So the whole team was on the podcast, and they talk about the game, how it works, what kind of audience is it intended for, what kind of reception it had at the beginning. So overall, it was a great episode, and definitely I applaud the efforts of Mathilde, because it's always great when you're seeing educators that are figuring out ways to improve. She wanted to improve herself. We always want to deliver our material as educators, in the best manner possible, and make sure that the students, they receive the information and they retain it. So definitely shout out to Mathilde and her team for Bacteria Game. So this week is actually Lab Week. So happy Lab Week to all my fellow laboratorians out there. You all do such great work. So definitely please continue doing so. So I appreciate everything you do, all the way from educators to people working on the benches to managers. Right? It takes a village to make this work. So your educators out there making sure your students, you're preparing the medical lab science students, your MLTs as well. So you're doing your best out there. Managers keeping up with staffing and all the demands that the job entails. And, the bench workers, the bench techs doing all the testing and making sure, right? Always using that knowledge and providing accurate results that help the patient so much. So definitely thank you for everything you do. So what better than on Lab Week, have an episode that features a medical lab sciences program. So, I had programs before, and so this time is the medical lab sciences program from St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri. So with me, I have the director of the program, Amanda Reed, and she's also the bacteriology instructor. So it was great, having a director that at the same time, they teach micro. So we had a great conversation about the program and something that caught my eye, which was, name that bug, which overall, you'll hear about in the episode, but it is meant to, to prepare students to make sure that, that they recognize the organisms, they have a good idea of what it is before they do biochemicals. And that is great. We also talk about biochemicals, we talk about automation. So definitely overall, it was a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed. So let's go ahead and listen to it. So in today's episode, we are talking lab and we are talking micro at the same time. Every now and then I do episodes that feature MLS programs, and they're just, they're pertain to the MLS, the medical lab sciences, the medical lab sciences programs. But on this time, we're going to talk about that, but at the same time, talk a little bit about microbiology. So with me today, I have the program director from the St. Louis University MLS program, Amanda Reed. Amanda, welcome to Let's Talk Micro.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Definitely my pleasure. So for the audience, let's go ahead and start with an introduction.
Sure. Yeah. So again, my name's Amanda Reed. I'm the Medical Laboratory Science Program Director at St. Louis University. I have been Program Director, um, gosh, since about 2015. I've been teaching here at SLU since about 2012. I'm also a graduate from this program. So I graduated from this program with a second bachelor's in 2008. But this was not my original career path. My original career path was supposed to be teaching high school biology and high school chemistry, and didn't work out too well for me. They this destroyed me. I couldn't handle them. So I was trying to figure out what I could do with my biology degree and my chemistry degree, or not, sorry, my biology degree. I didn't have a chemistry degree, but my biology degree and my master's in education. And and it turns out, I didn't prepare myself for working in research labs or industry as a student. I was focused on education. So I was trying to figure out what I could do with this biology degree. And turns out I really wasn't qualified for much because I didn't prepare myself in that way. And so I was trying to figure out how I could get involved in healthcare. And I just, did some internet searching, did some Google searching, and saw that many hospital labs were hiring, but you needed a special certification. And so I didn't know what those letters meant. I didn't know what ASCP meant on all of the job forms. And so uh, searched a little bit more, figured out it was a certification to be a medical laboratory scientist, and then searched for how I could become that, and found actually St. Louis University's program. So I was a student here at St. Louis University, got a second bachelor's in medical lab science. And once I graduated, I was fortunate enough to be hired for a day shift micro position, which never happens. Day shift micro at one of our affiliates in St. Louis, Barnes Jewish Hospital, which is a fantastic hospital. Got to see some crazy stuff while I worked at Barnes. And then about 4 years later, I got a letter in the mail saying that there was a faculty position open here at SLU and that I should apply. And so I did. And now I'm in charge of the program that I graduated from. So it's been an interesting journey so far.
Yes, it definitely sounds like it. And one thing that your story definitely it resonates with a lot of the medical lab scientists or the students that we see that they have finished a degree and they're either they didn't know about this program or the same thing, like someone does have a degree and then they find out that to work in a hospital, they need, to have a certain training and credentials. And so definitely it's very typical, which is one of the things that why we're now bringing more awareness about the MLS. And some programs, are doing summer
Mhm.
immersion and definitely hitting social media, which is how I found you. I know that this program definitely has had a presence. When I started the podcast, I probably was one of the first few pages that I saw, like on Instagram, and I see you're on TikTok now, and I will talk more about that at the end. Um, yeah, but
Okay.
and so yeah, and then when you said what you said about it must have been like like a different feeling, right? Going back to the same school and now teaching in it, because I've experienced that and it felt so different. Like instead of sitting back and watching someone, I'm the one that they're watching, so it's definitely a different feeling, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's strange being on the other side. But I also think it's beneficial because you've been through it and you have a certain level of empathy for them. Because I remember how it felt to be that stressed out. I think it's good to be able to, yeah, to empathize with them.
I hear you. So let's go ahead and so what kind of program, like I mentioned before, and there are some different MLS programs out there, like your 2+2, 4+1. So what kind of program is the MLS program at the St. Louis University?
Yeah, we are a 2+2 program. So we are a bachelor's program. We are freshman entry. So once a student applies and is admitted to SLU, as soon as they declare MLS, they are part of the major. Um, their first 2 years, they spend taking their They take actually pre-med level biologies and chemistries. They do their math courses, and then they do their liberal arts core, right? They get all of those kind of done their first 2 years. And then their last 2 years, excuse me, their last 2 years, they spend focusing on MLS specific courses. And so their junior year is all lecture and student lab. Fall semester of their senior year is also lecture and student lab. And then their spring semester, I send them out to a full semester of clinical rotations locally here in St. Louis. We have about 8 to 10 students per cohort. That's a typical size. If all the stars aligned and all of my clinical affiliates could take every single one of my students that I have space for, I could have as many as 20. But as you said earlier, we're trying to get the word out about MLS. MLS is kind of a hidden profession. It's a hidden major. And so it's typical that we don't fill those 20 slots, although I'm trying. But we typically are around 8 to 10.
Okay, so you don't fill all the slots. Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. I'm trying really hard.
Yeah, that's just definitely, we have to continue bringing that awareness, and once again, once we hit that goal that a lot of people are aware, then we have to be prepared to increasing the program, and have more classes, because typically you have like one class rotating at a time. But if we achieve the goal of bringing awareness, that will change, and then we have to adapt to that. Yeah. I was thinking what you said about definitely years ago with the first shift position in microbiology. Yeah, that was very hard. Like I had to work on night shift and then start working my way down. Nowadays, it's a little bit more demand, so maybe it might be a little bit easier. But I remember like 10 years ago, yeah, it was just first shift was like full of 20, techs that had been working 20, 30 years on the bench. So one position, it was so rare for it to open. So I definitely agree with that.
Oh yeah, I know, I snatched that up right away.
Yeah, that's the way that it is set up. That's where you get that rich experience with cultures, and most of the plate reading is done on first shift. So that's one of the things that if you want to learn and get into the whole world of cultures, yeah, you have to be on first shift.
Yeah. Although that's starting to change a little bit with automation and stuff, which I think we'll talk about later. But
I definitely agree. Okay, so one thing that this is a little bit rare in the sense that I have talked to other MLS directors before, but they're not the micro instructor. So this is also very interesting for me. So you are the bacteriology instructor. So I want to ask about that. So how is the micro portion structure? Like do you do like some schools they do one semester of parasite and one of micro, or how is the one of your program?
yeah, so typically what happens is in the fall semester, we have a course that's just called medical microbiology. And it is a general course. It's open to not only MLS majors, but it's open to other majors in the Boise College of Health Sciences, which is the college that I'm located in within St. Louis University. So it's open to outside majors. So it's a general medical microbiology course. They learn about the different groups of organisms. They learn about disease association, and they learn about very basic identification, just enough so that if they were working, like let's say we had a nutrition and dietetics student, the student would be able to be like, oh, okay, this patient is getting over a bout of, I'm just making something up off the top of my head. They're getting over a case of food poisoning. They had Campylobacter. At least the nutrition student would understand, okay, I know what that organism is. I know what disease it's associated with. So it's a very kind of general med micro course. And then in the spring semester of that same year, the MLS students only take a bacteriology specific course lecture, and then they take a hands-on lab that complements that lecture, focused just on bacteriology. And the focus of that course is ID, so growth and ID. So they get a full hands-on semester where the lab complements the lecture. And then finally, we finish it all up with a full semester of mycology parasitology course. That course, we used to have a hands-on lab with that course, but it ended up mostly being slide reading. And so we've digitized it and incorporated it into more of just like a lecture-based course with some imaging and things like that they have to look at. But they don't have a full student lab associated with it. And then finally, after that, they go to clinic, and I send them on a 4-week microbiology clinical rotation, and then they have their other areas that they rotate through. But our microbiology rotation is 4 weeks long.
Yeah, that's about the time. I mean, I remember mine was like 4 weeks long, and then definitely the best 4 weeks in the rotation for me. I mean, I knew that I love micro early on. I've been objective and I try to other areas. I always land back here. So now I'm staying here. But definitely, yeah, it's just the 4 weeks. So definitely the instructor in me wants to know this, as far as how do you assess their knowledge, typically like unknowns are very popular, maybe some tests where they get some plates and then they have to do biochemicals. So what kind of testing is done?
Yeah, so the way I structure it, in the lecture portion of the bacteriology class, they have traditional quizzes and exams. A lot of my exams are kind of small case based. So they'll have like a little case scenario, some results, and the questions all stem from those cases. In the laboratory portion, I approach it where they are introduced to organisms a group at a time. So for example, they're introduced to the gram-positive cocci at the very beginning. They have a lab where they get to see each of the organisms on the plate. They get to gram stain each. They get to do the basic biochemical spot testing, just basic biochemicals on the gram positives. And then the next week, we would move to gram positive rods. So they would learn all the new things about the gram positive rods. And then their unknown for that week would be the gram positive cocci. So they always have a chance to learn about it. And then the following week is their unknown. I make the unknowns kind of low stakes, to be honest with you, because I want them to more focus on being comfortable asking questions about the process, the why, and then I don't get into making high stakes unknowns until the very end of the semester. So once we've gone through all of the organism groupings, so we go through our gram positive cocci, we go through our gram positive rods, we go through our kind of, I call them fastidious gram negative rods. I know people have different names for how they like to group them, but basic Haemophilus, Neisseria, gonorrhea, Moraxella, that's basically it with those. So we'll go through those. We'll go through our Enterobacteriales. We'll go through some non-lactose fermenting gram negative rods. Anaerobes aren't quite worth it for me to do in our student lab because they take so long to grow and there's not much biochemically they can do in the student lab. We sometimes just grow them so they can smell how gross they are, and just do some gram staining and things like that. And then I pivot from groupings to then specimen types. So at the end of the semester, I'll mock up specimens or I'll get specimens from our clinical affiliates for the students to work up. And then those usually have more than one organism in them. And then we have to differentiate normal flora from pathogen. So they have to pick out the right pathogen and then identify it, using the schemes that we have in our student lab based on our limited, biochemical availability. So that's pretty much how we structure it. So we're after spring break now. So actually this morning I went to one of our affiliates, picked up some blood culture bottles that they were about to throw out because they were done with them. And that's going to be this week's unknowns. So they're going to practice blood cultures. That's kind of overall how it's structured.
Okay, definitely. I like it. And yeah, with blood cultures, you definitely get to see the best morphology for those cocci. You see those beautiful chains, those beautiful clusters. So it's a great sample because when we do smears from colonies, they don't look the same as if they will look like coming from the body.
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to have somebody else say that. The students don't tend to believe me, but um, I'm like, okay, remember, this isn't from a broth, so it's going to be a little bit hard because you put a whole lot on your gram stain, so they're all just clumped together. Um, they struggle with that. They struggle with that a little bit.
Yeah, and then they're surprised when they see how big they are when it come from blood. So I always, yeah, if I'm doing some sort of assessment, I specify like if the sample is for blood or something like that. That way, if they identify it, then you can fairly say these are clusters, these are chains. Whereas you can really appreciate that on an indirect smear. And I do like the fact that you say, kind of identifying what's normal flora or not, because, they do get to work with the organisms. And it is always nice when you see everything isolated in a plate. But on the bench, it's not like that. Sometimes, that pseudomonas that you're trying to isolate, it's buried in a sea of normal flora and a lot of stuff. So training your eyes to recognize those pathogens is definitely something very helpful for the lab.
Yeah, and um, since I worked in the microbiology lab that took students for clinical rotations, I remember sitting at the bench with them and talking through cultures with them and realizing that they didn't have that practice yet. Even on like a basic level, everything they looked at was isolated, pure plates, nice and pretty. And so once I started teaching, I wanted to make sure that before they go to clinic, that they had at least had an idea of how to be like, okay, this is a respiratory. I'm going to scan for betas, and I'm going to scan for alphas and rule out pneumo. Just very basic things like that before they set foot in clinic. And I think it helps make their clinical time a little bit more. They can focus on more advanced and unusual things than more basic things like that. So
Yeah, that's good. Definitely good. So let's talk about something that really caught my eye when I was looking at your page on the school's page on social media, which was the name that bug. I like it. So, what is name that bug?
So name that bug. I have to give full credit to a former coworker of mine when I worked at Barnes Jewish, Robin. Robin came up with name that bug for students who were doing their clinical rotations, just as a way, again, for them to have an idea of what the organism is just by sight before they do any testing. So full credit to Robin. But name that bug is essentially um, I mentioned earlier that in the student lab, we go by groups of organisms. So one week will be gram-positive cocci, the next will be gram-positive rods, maybe a week of the Enterobacteriales. I still have a hard time getting used to saying that and not Enterobacteriaceae. I have to make a mental effort to do that every single time. And so what name that bug is essentially I subculture and plate all of the organisms that these students have been exposed to so far. At first, they each get a blood agar plate of each of the organisms, and the blood agar plates just have a number on them, so they're randomly numbered. I have a key, of course, and the first thing I do is I give them all of the blood agar plates, and then I tell them, okay, first thing that I want you to do is to separate your gram-positive cocci from your gram-negative rods. Do it. Whoever does it quickest, I check them off. And then I say, okay, with your gram-positive organisms, separate them into staph and streps. And then they do that as fast as they can. Once they've done that successfully, then they can identify their gram-positive cocci, let's say. They get through the gram-positive cocci, now they're time to move on to their gram-negative rods. And it's at this time that I'll give them their McConkeys that go along with the blood agar plates so that they can use both to help them identify the gram-negative organisms. So it's really just a practice of them really getting used to what the colony morphology is and having a good idea, at least, of what they think it is before they even do any testing. So that's the point that I like to get them to. So I make it a competition. Whoever gets done the first wins, essentially. And this year we have added a crown to it. So whoever wins gets the crown for that week. And then the crown gets a jewel added to it for each new each new organism group. So far we have a gram-positive coccyne clusters jewel, we have a gram-negative rod jewel, and we have a gram-positive rod jewel. So at the end of the course, someone will be crowned the queen of Name That Bug.
I love it, I have to say. I mean, and what you just said about having them have a good idea of what it is before they even do testing, that's one of the biggest pet peeves of mine. And we'll talk a little bit more about automation in a sec. But definitely, like with just what you need when you're working cultures, and I always try to stress this to students or if I'm training someone, it's about you need to have a good idea of what you have, and you're basically putting it on the instrument to confirm, to prove what you have. So you're looking at this organism, so you have an idea. I have a Staph aureus, I have E. coli, and granted, some of them they're a little bit trickier than others, but at the very least, you have a good concept, a good grasp of what you're testing, not just going blindly. And this is one thing, there's the only secret to being a good microbiologist is that you have to do the work. It's just as simple as that. And educate yourself, of course, but you have to do it over and over and over again. Repetition, which is, gram stains, seeing the plates multiple times, doing multiple testing. And that's the only way you're going to get proficient. These bugs, they don't read books, they don't go to school, they change all the time. So you have to be looking at them. Even if you're the brightest and you look at 1,000 pictures and you memorize them, these things change. So you definitely need to have a good grasp. So I do like, what you're doing with them to get that, that thinking going about, okay, I have this before I even do a biochemical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I would say the only drawback is that, I have a limited stock of organisms, right? So, our staff always looks like our staff. But, when you are working in clinic, when you're working in real life, um, staff can sometimes take on many different shapes and forms, right? So many different colony morphologies. So they get used to seeing ours, and I just hope that it, translates a little bit to clinic by the time that they get there. But we've all been fooled, right? If you've worked in the micro lab, we've all been fooled at some point where we were sure it was something and turns out it was something different completely. So I think we've all had that experience.
Oh yeah, definitely we have. And yeah, it's definitely, and you're talking about unusual morphologies. I like to, if I see an organism like that, I will take a picture and I will share it to kind of just people keep in mind that, yeah, you can have this type of morphology. I posted on my social media pages, there was a mucoid Staph aureus, which we don't see that often. And it got a lot of reactions over the public saying, like, oh no, this is mixed. I'm 95% sure it's mixed. And I'm like, no, this is a pure culture. This is how it looks. But after a while, you're like, okay, well, if you think it's mixed, that's just, that's your opinion. But I do like to share pictures of things like that. That way, we can keep it in our mind that just it could happen. And if you encounter that,
Yeah.
yeah, you're aware of it.
I once had a catalase negative Staph aureus from a blood culture, but it was confirmed Staph aureus by PCR. So, they do weird things all the time, these bugs. So you've got to stay on top of it. You've got to have a general idea of what you're looking at.
Yes, definitely. So as far as now we're going to talk a little bit about automation, and you teach micro and you have worked in micro. So you definitely, you're aware that molecular is making huge leaps in this field. It's advancing on a, taking giant steps. And we have instruments such as the MALDI-TOF, which is wonderful with the volume, and for experienced people, it works great. But however, that brings aside that techs, they're doing less and less tests like biochemicals and gram stains. What are your thoughts on this?
So I'm mixed on this. With MALDI-TOF, like you said, I think it's great for speeding up results. It's great for patient care. Doctors can get information quicker. It's cost effective. It's more cost effective for the lab. But on the downside, it's taken away some of the fun, I would say, and some of the art that's involved in the micro lab. But that's something that I've talked with my clinical sites about is, I want to know, what testing are you still doing? And I would say, they're all still doing catalases, they're all still doing oxidases, they're all still doing indoles. So they're doing those basic spot tests. And so I'm definitely keeping those in the student lab. Some of them still have Vitex as backups. Some of them just have two MALDIs. If one goes down, they use the other one, which is very fortunate for those who can afford to have two MALDIs. But some do still have Vitex. Some do still have Microscan. But most of it is going automated, and not just MALDI and molecular, but even the plating and the incubation is becoming automated. At least two of our clinical affiliates here in the St. Louis area are automated. So some things that I have noticed, though, from talking with our affiliates is them, especially the older techs, saying that the younger techs are relying on the instruments too much to give them results. Not being able to, what we talked about earlier, being able to pick out the important colonies from the normal flora, having a very hard time with that. So I think we still definitely need to be able to recognize colony morphology, differentiate normal flora from potential pathogens, work through problems, because we all know MALDI goes down, right? MALDI instruments break, instruments have downtime, and then sometimes they have difficulty differentiating certain groups of organisms. So you still have to be able to rely on what you know a little bit. So I have mixed feelings about it, but I need to just go with the times. I mean, I feel like I'm getting stuck in becoming an old crotchety person who is like, well, in my day, we knew how to do everything. So I think it has its advantages and disadvantages, but I definitely still think it's important to know your basic biochemicals and your basic colony morphology.
Yeah, I agree with you, and definitely technology is very helpful, and especially in large facilities, like if that thing breaks down, we all having a very hard day. But yeah, definitely keeping in mind the knowledge of the biochemicals, and things can go wrong. What if the person that's setting up the moldy for you, they don't know what the colony looks like, and they're set something else, and then you don't know what it is, and you accept that ID. Or the same thing, what if someone scanned the wrong patient when they were setting up that colony, and you don't know what it is? So definitely we see cases like that, and yeah, it's very helpful, especially if you need to rule out something, especially if you don't do susceptibilities, that you put it there, you get your ID, your culture is done. But I do see sometimes, like people just, oh, moldy failed. Let me go ahead and sub it out, and then you're holding that culture, and they haven't even done a gram stain at all. So this is the things that get me a little bit. It's like, okay, what if it's just do that gram stain, and what if it's a lactobacillus on a urine culture? Looks like lacto, you have a normal urogenital flora. You're done with it. But they don't want to go. And then this is the thing, yeah, when they present a case or something, it's like, have you done a gram stain? And it's like, oh no, I haven't yet. It's like, okay, that's the first step.
Yeah. Or even let's say strep agalactiae versus listeria, let's say, right? If you don't do your basic biochemicals or your or a gram stain, that could lead you down two very different paths. And while MALDI should pick that up, you could just see potential complications there. And then the other scenario that I can see is having potential bioterrorism organisms, and knowing that you should not be putting those on the MALDI. At least for our clinical affiliates, their procedure, no, that should not, nothing that is a potential bioterrorism organism should be going on the MALDI. So being able to screen for those and recognize those is always, important. We live in an area where Francisella is endemic. So we do get Francisellus, outside of a bioterrorism scenario, but you have to treat it very carefully, right? So we talk about the importance of definitely being able to know when those little alarm bells should go off in your brain about potential bioterrorism organisms, and the simple spot test that you can do to prevent you from exposing an entire laboratory, essentially.
Yeah, it's definitely happened, and we had sometimes, like a sample that ended up being Brucella. It's 4 or 5 people get implicated in the whole thing. Yeah, so with unawareness, things can go that way really quick. Yeah. So yeah, this is a topic that I can talk for a lot because it's a very dear subject to me. But definitely, is there anything else that you want to add?
Well, I just want to say, this is something that in the educators community we talk about quite a bit. Like, there was just a thread on our educators listserv. I don't know if you're on the educators listserv or not, but a thread just came through: teaching microbiology with increasing automation used in practice. So everyone is struggling with determining, should they continue ordering these traditional biochemicals in the student lab for the students to practice? Should they just talk about them? Um, you know, when will when will the Board of Certification remove biochemicals completely from their exam? That kind of a thing. So the debate goes on and on. So while we still have to teach a lot of the biochemicals, because as far as we know, there's still exam questions about them. So we don't want to do the students a disservice. We want them to do well on their exam. But at the same time, we also want to prepare them for what they're going to be seeing in real life. So, I'll get feedback from my students that, oh, you made us memorize all these biochemicals and all these things, but all we did was put things on the MALDI. So they're a little salty about it. But then once they start studying for the certification exam, they see that those are practice questions that they need to be able to answer. So I think we have to somehow find a balance between removing some of this old material that is no longer routinely used. It may be used in some smaller labs, but honestly, smaller labs are going away, and they're sending all of their micro out to reference labs anyway, or hospital systems are consolidating their micro labs so that they don't all do their own micro anymore. So it's hard to figure out, what should the Board of Certification keep on the exam, what should they get rid of, and then how do we then transition our student labs so that we can account for all of the automate. I mean, we're not going to get MALDI in our student labs, right? We're not going to have biofires in our student lab. So, what then do we do with our students in student labs to help prepare them for what they're going to see in clinic? It's an ongoing discussion, and it's tricky.
Yeah, I see that, and it's definitely a challenge. And there are some like TSIs, and I have never done a TSI in any lab that I have been worked on all my years. But you get you get questions about it in your boards and stuff, so you have to cover it. And I know, like, when I post pictures of TSI, like on social media, some people will like, why are you showing this? Or we don't need this, it's unnecessary. But students, they do have to learn about it because they get tested on. So I do have to teach them some of that stuff, but at the same time, I try to keep it in line with the same biochemicals that they're using in the hospital sites. Like like you see, I try to get the same, the same catalasing, coagulase, strip typing. That way, they when they go to their sites, they're like, okay, this is what I use, this is what I did. But I can definitely see the challenge in that, and what we're teaching, and then what they're actually gonna use when they get to the lab. Well, definitely, Amanda, it's been great having you. Thank you so much for taking the time to come in into Let's Talk Micro.
Oh, thank you. I'm always happy to talk micro. So thank you for inviting me, and I had a great time.
Definitely, my pleasure. And that, my dear audience, is the end of this episode. I hope you enjoy learning about the St. Louis University Medical Laboratory Sciences program and name that bug. As always, I enjoy sharing information with you, connecting with people. So, as I said on the intro, happy lab week. Thank you all for all the medical professionals out there, medical lab professionals out there, for all the work you do, all the way from teaching students, from being a director of the program, from being a manager, a lab director, working on the bench, all the way from typing that unit to doing that chemistry test, that hematology, doing your microcultures. Thank you for everything you do. We had challenging times and everyone rose to that challenge and helped the patients and did their best. So shout out to you all. Happy Lab Week. As always, continue bringing that passion to what you do. It's so important. We do such great work. So, as always, stay motivated, stay safe, and of course, continue talking micro. Until the next time. Bye.